When you want to paint a black subject with watercolor, for example, this beautiful tropical bird, there are two basic ways of doing it. You can either use black pigments straight from the tube. Another way is to apply a variety of dark colors that are not quite black, glazing them slowly to build up your values. The second method is my favorite way to paint black with watercolor, and in this video I will take you through the process step by step using this toucan bird as an example. Thank you Squarespace for sponsoring this video, more on that later. And this will give you a much better result because you will be able to create three-dimensional shape while capturing some of the beautiful and natural color reflections that are always present even in the darkest subjects. For now, let's sketch our bird, and you can find a link to the reference photo in the video description below so you can practice on your own time. You can see that I introduced a bunch of other elements here just to spruce it up, including the flower and some greenery. So if you're interested in painting the full composition with me, as always, I've posted the full tutorial in real time with black and white outlines on my Patreon. And the entire process is about 4 hours long, not including the drying time. Before I start working on the bird, I just want to paint some of the lighter elements around it, especially the yellow beak and maybe even the flower. This will help us maintain crisp edges on all our color segments because, as you will see in just a minute, I will be applying darker color right next to light, overlapping the edges ever so slightly. And the pigments I'm using here are called Hansei Yellow Deep and Scarlet Lake. All my materials are listed in the video description below. Now, when we're ready to work on the bird, we need to establish an underpainting first. This is the key to painting realistic black subjects in my experience. So instead of covering everything with a dark or black color straight away, what we want to do is to establish the lightest and most vibrant highlights at first. These splashes of light color will for the most part be covered by the next dark layer, but they will shine through because remember, watercolors are transparent. And so we have an opportunity to take advantage of this unique and wonderful quality of watercolor pigments instead of just going in with harsh black strokes right away and losing the translucent light look that watercolors are famous for. So I'm starting with phthalo blue on top of the bird's head and the back, all the areas that are catching some light. And notice that I even added a few splashes of warm red on top of his head, helping me capture a very subtle sheen that we can observe in the reference photo. I will even try to paint around the pure white feathers that are visible on the side of the wing and then gradually switch to a darker pigment called indigo as I move closer to the belly where the shadows are most pronounced. Indigo is a mix of pure black and indothrone blue, and it's the best shortcut I found for using pure black straight from the tube because it gives us a lot of flexibility by gently and seamlessly mixing with other colors without creating mud as pure black would tend to do. And of course, I can add some other hues using wet on wet method. I personally love diaxazine purple. You can try turquoise or any other color of your choice, and maybe even add a few darker streaks to mark up the feathers using wet on wet method. And don't forget the beak, we have a few very beautiful segments there, and once again I will use diluted phthalo blue to capture the highlights and maybe a bit of dark indigo around the shadows. Similarly, I'm going to paint the tail as one big continuous segment of light blue, maybe leaving some of the light elements without any color and dropping darker indigo in that area under the branch where the shadows are most pronounced, but still keeping it all very, very light because we know that this is an underpainting, just the first layer that will get covered by a much darker layer of color later on. So keep this principle in mind. Before we paint that second layer, I need to make sure that everything is completely dry. While I'm waiting, allow me to quickly tell you about the sponsor of this video. Squarespace is an all-in-one website platform for managing your brand. I recently used it to build and to launch my brand new website, and I couldn't be happier with the process and the final result. It's really amazing how easy it was to customize my site using their guided design system. They call it the Squarespace Blueprint, and I was able to launch a completely personalized illustration portfolio and a catalog of my watercolor classes without having to learn any complicated technology. If you're a creator like me and you need to grow your online presence, I highly recommend exploring Squarespace. You can choose from a variety of professional layouts and styling options, add products and services for sale, and even offer online courses and memberships directly on your website. So make sure to check out squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to this link and save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. And now that the first layer is completely dry, we can come back and finally make everything look a lot darker. But there are a couple of tricks here that I need to show you. So I'm going to use the same pigments, some vibrant blue, darker indigo, and maybe some pure indanthrone blue on its own, just gently covering the first layer, but I'm not going to apply my color throughout. Instead, I'm only covering the darkest shadows and blending gently with a clean damp brush so that I can preserve some of the vibrant blues underneath. This is very important because we're preserving these patches of vibrant blue and purple to show that there are some parts of the bird that are turned towards the source of light, meaning the entire body of the bird won't come out looking flat. These patches of light color are really helping us create a sense of three-dimensional form. And notice that my pigments are still quite diluted, giving me a lot of flexibility as I try to recreate these transitions from light to dark. And at this stage you might be saying, but Anna, what about another way of painting black things? The one that involves mixing 3 primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, or maybe even 2 colors. I'm going to show you those options in just a second. And I should mention that this method is absolutely valid as well, pre-mixing your blacks on the palette ahead of time. And I like it much better than using black straight from the tube. It will always give you a high degree of flexibility, allowing you to tailor the blacks to suit the specific needs of your composition. So for example, some popular recipes that will help you create very rich, dynamic blacks include ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. And I made a little mix for you. As you can see, it creates a very granulating black because of course typical ultramarine is a granulating color. So there's a lot of texture here. Or another one of my favorite examples is phthalo blue and burnt umber, a bit of greenish tint in my mix, which is also quite interesting and might work for landscapes. I find these types of mixes in general work very well for more muted blacks that don't require a lot of color variation. For example, we recently used ultramarine and umber in a portrait to paint hair, and this worked out really well. But more often than not, I prefer to mix directly on paper, which is what I'm doing here on this bird, to help me preserve some of the pure vibrant hues. And so what you see is me slowly transitioning from vibrant phthalo blue to darker indigo, and then bringing in pure purple and even maybe turquoise, using very concentrated color as I move closer and closer to the right-hand side where the shadows are more pronounced. And I'm mixing directly on paper, letting my colors blend there instead of pre-mixing my blacks on the palette separately. If you're feeling more adventurous and want to add some texture, you can add a few drops of clear water. This is completely optional, and it will create a few so-called blooms where the water is pushing the particles of paint out, and you get a few unpredictable areas of texture just to break up the monotonous segment and add some visual interest. I'm going to add a few extra splashes of indigo on the beak, and of course we need to paint some shadows on the tail. So here I'm just going to use the so-called negative painting technique to outline individual feathers, just the shadows around them, blending carefully with a clean damp brush so my darker color can disappear into the lighter layer of blue underneath. And after this second layer is completely dry, you can always come back and add a bit more value. Here I'm using indigo again as my darkest dark, just to accentuate the shadows under the wing. This is why it was so important to start light, so we can have some flexibility to add these subtle details later on. So as you can see, the final result looks very dark. The bird is almost black, especially next to the vibrant greenery and the flower that's right next to it. But we were able to maintain a sense of three-dimensional form by preserving the highlights and taking advantage of the transparent nature of watercolors to build our values slowly and gradually, and even introducing subtle color variations and texture that add so much visual interest and really unify the palette across all the different elements in this composition. I think this looks much better than using pure black, but I'm just a person on the internet, so let me know in the comments below what you think of this approach versus using black straight from the tube. As always, share this video with someone who loves watercolor painting. This really helps my channel, and if you're interested in painting birds in general and want to level up your skills, I have an entire playlist of various watercolor birds, so you can check out those tutorials next. Thank you for watching and painting with me. I will see you soon.